I found a bottle of personal lubricant in my husband's briefcase, and I quietly poured superglue into it. At 2 a.m., the hospital called, asking the family to come immediately to sign a surgical consent form because the two of them had to be separated. Late autumn afternoons in Chicago often bring a soft, biting chill. It's not enough to freeze you, but it's enough to slip up your sleeves, into your pores, and even into your heart. Amidst the air that smelled faintly of dying leaves and wood smoke, I stood in my mother-in-law's kitchen, staring at a simmering pot of beef stew. I never thought the roof I had protected all these years would become the place that left me the coldest. My name is Rachel. I was 34 years old at the time. If I hadn't gotten married, I might still be in a laboratory or on a construction site. My hands holding blueprints, my eyes scanning material specifications as if it were my native language. I used to be a building materials engineer. I had an advanced degree and a great position at work, but since marrying Arthur, I chose to step back. Outsiders looking in often said, I had a great life. A successful husband, a wealthy in-law family, no need to stress about bills. Only those living inside the house know that sometimes, a great life is actually just being placed in a perfectly fitted frame and being expected to live without ever stepping outside of it. My mother-in-law's house was located in an upscale suburb in the North Shore. The driveway was long and paved, leading to a 4-story, stone-clad estate built over a decade ago. Inside, there was always the scent of expensive floor polish and the faint smell of vanilla candles burning in the grand foyer. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, was a woman who held etiquette above all else. Wherever she went, her clothes were impeccably tailored, her hair dyed a rich dark brown, and her words perfectly measured, especially in front of relatives. Anyone who met her would praise her. Eleanor, you are so lucky. Both your sons are so successful. She loved hearing it, but always added a pre-rehearsed line. That's because our family knows how to raise them. And my daughters-in-law know their place. That's why our home is so peaceful. It sounded like a compliment, but I knew that in her eyes, knowing your place meant knowing when to yield for your husband, knowing how to swallow disappointment, knowing when to smile and when to stay quiet. In short, a good daughter-in-law was one who didn't make ripples in the water. My husband, Arthur, was 3 years older than me. He was the chief operating officer at his family's building materials company, Apex Materials. He was tall, spoke calmly, and commanded respect. He was the type of man who easily made people trust him. He didn't talk much, was never crude, and never raised his voice in public. When we first started dating, I thought I had found a mature, responsible partner. He once said something that melted the heart of an orphaned girl like me. Don't worry, you have me now. A short sentence I believed for years. His younger brother, Ben, was 4 years younger and served as the head of logistics at the same company. Ben was temperamental, easily offended, and constantly compared to his older brother, leaving a permanent chip on his shoulder. Ben's wife was Mia. She was a few years younger than me, blonde, fair-skinned, and very talkative. Whenever she met relatives, her smile bloomed like a spring flower. Mia called me Rachel, sweetie, in a sickeningly sugary tone. But between women, there are things that don't need to be said to be felt. Every time Eleanor praised me in front of others, I could catch the momentary darkness in Mia's eyes before she returned to her cheerful self. That evening, as usual, the whole family had dinner together. I served the food on the table: pot roast, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, and Arthur's favorite gravy. As soon as she sat down, Eleanor looked around the table and nodded. Rachel is always so organized. That's the real value of a woman in the house. Mia smiled while scooping some potatoes for her husband. You're always praising Rachel, Mom. I have it memorized by now. Eleanor looked at Mia with a thin smile. True praise should be heard. You should learn from your sister-in-law. Don't make a fuss out of everything. The atmosphere at the table stiffened. Mia put down her spoon, smiling, but her eyes were cold. Yes, Mom. I'm still young, I still have a lot to learn. Ben frowned. Mom, just eat. Stop talking. Eleanor glared at her youngest son. Did I say something wrong? If I did, correct me. This house isn't a frat house. I quietly poured gravy over my mother-in-law's plate. Being the eldest daughter-in-law in this house sometimes felt like being a shock absorber. Whoever hit it would feel a soft bounce. But no one ever asked if the shock absorber was worn out or broken. Arthur, sitting next to me, barely spoke from the beginning to the end of the meal. He ate slowly, occasionally glancing at his phone, which was placed face down next to his hand. I asked, "Do you want more roast?" He just gave a short, "I'm good." It was a simple exchange, nothing inherently wrong with it. But between a husband and wife, it's not always the harsh words that hurt. It's the bland, empty attitude that hollows out your heart. He didn't used to be like this. He used to tell me about company affairs, ask if the new paint colors in the living room looked right, or even pop into the kitchen just to help me chop vegetables while laughing. A brilliant engineer like you just chopping carrots? What a shame. But now, he walked past me like I was a piece of furniture he was used to seeing. Still there, still used every day, but no longer noticed. After dinner, I stood up to clear the table. Eleanor went up to her room to watch reality TV. Ben went out to the patio to smoke. Mia sat fixing her hair in the reflection of her dark phone screen. I carried the stack of plates to the kitchen. The sound of running tap water was loud. When I turned around, I saw Arthur standing on the first-floor balcony, on his phone. He spoke very softly, almost a whisper. His back to the house, one hand in his slacks, the other pressing the phone tight to his ear. I couldn't hear who was on the other end, but I saw a gentleness in his shoulders that he hadn't shown me in a long time. People say women are overly sensitive. I don't think it's sensitivity. It's just that we live by observing. A different kind of sigh, a hurried dinner, an avoiding gaze they all speak. I stood still near the kitchen door. My hands were still wet. The autumn wind blew through the corridor, giving me goosebumps. Arthur still had his back to me, his voice low and fast, as if terrified someone would hear. The moment was brief, but somehow I felt like I was watching a door quietly close inside my own home. The next morning, the Chicago wind felt even sharper. It was barely 6 a.m., but the sound of garbage trucks and early commuters could already be heard. I woke up first, as usual, threw on a thin cardigan, and went down to the kitchen to start the coffee, make oatmeal, and prepare tea for my mother-in-law. These chores had become a mindless routine. An outsider looking at this morning would think our family was perfectly ordered. The mother-in-law gets her hot tea, the husband gets his pressed shirts, and the brother-in-law gets his packed lunch. Only I knew that order does not equal warmth. Sometimes, it's just a neatly drawn curtain hiding the torn parts inside. I remembered my first years of marriage. Arthur wasn't this cold back then. On rainy mornings, he would wake up first, make me hot chocolate, and say, "Rachel, wake up. You'll be late." When I stayed up late helping him revise a technical proposal, he would massage my shoulders and smile. Marrying you was the greatest win of my life. I truly believed it then. I believed it so much that when he said the family business was expanding and he needed someone at home to manage everything so he could focus, I nodded without a second thought. I quit my job after almost 2 years of marriage. On the day I handed in my resignation, my boss asked if I had thought it through, saying it was a shame for someone with my talent to abandon her career. I smiled and said, "At some point, a woman has to choose her priorities." Looking back now, life doesn't always force us to choose between career and family. Sometimes we willingly surrender a piece of ourselves. And then others get used to that sacrifice and view it as an entitlement. Arthur still told outsiders, "My wife is amazing. She handles everything at home so I can be where I am." It sounded like an award, but over time I felt it was more like a trophy displayed to look good rather than genuine acknowledgement. Because if he truly understood my value, he wouldn't let me live like a ghost in my own home. Around 7 a.m., Eleanor came down in a brown silk pajama set. "Is Arthur awake, honey?" I placed a bowl of oatmeal in front of her. "He's getting dressed, Eleanor. He'll be down soon." She sipped her tea. Men deal with a lot out there. When they come home, all they want is a hot meal and peace. A wife's greatest strength is keeping the peace in the home. Remember that. I smiled politely. "Yes, Eleanor, I know." She looked at me for a moment, lowering her voice. "Let me be honest. Arthur has looked very tense lately. Maybe work is heavy. As a wife, you need to be softer. If you're too rigid, it causes problems." Hearing that, my heart tasted bitter. For years, I had never contradicted my husband at the table, never spoken a disrespectful word to her. If that was still considered not soft enough, maybe to them, The ideal wife was one without feelings. A few moments later, Ben and Mia came down. Mia was wearing a cream knit dress. She immediately pulled out a compact mirror to check her lipstick. Eleanor frowned. "We're just having breakfast at home. Why are you dressed like you're going to a gala?" Mia smiled sweetly. "Just for fun, Mom. A woman should look put together." Eleanor threw out a half-joking, half-serious remark. "Put together is fine. But in a marriage, attitude matters more than looks." Ben scoffed and pulled his chair out roughly. "Do you have to give a sermon every single morning, Mom?" Eleanor glared at him. "I'm talking to your wife, not you. Why are you getting defensive?" Mia pouted slightly, thinking no one saw, but I did. That was how it was in this house. Words rarely stabbed directly. They were wrapped in superficial softness, but the needle was hidden inside. Arthur came down last. He wore a light blue dress shirt, carrying his tie. He looked immaculate as always. But the moment he sat down, he grabbed his phone. I set his breakfast down and asked, "Do you want some eggs?" He didn't look at me. His eyes were glued to the screen. "No need." I sat across from him, feeling like I was talking to a colleague, not my husband. At least he used to ask what I was doing that day, if I was tired, or if his mother was being annoying. Lately, our conversations had become shorter, like a rope being cut bit by bit. Sometimes our entire evening dialogue was, "Did you eat?" "Yes." "Working late?" "Yes." "Go to sleep first." "Okay." People say marriage is a lifelong bond. But some marriages are destroyed not by violence or blatant infidelity, but by a silence that quietly rots everything. That afternoon, I was organizing the closet. While folding Arthur's shirts, I caught a faint, strange perfume on the collar. It wasn't cheap or overpowering, but a soft, elegant floral. Definitely not the perfume I used. I held the shirt longer than usual, smiling bitterly at myself. Women are strange. Sometimes, without any solid proof, just a stray hair or a foreign scent, it's enough to set the heart racing. Later, I went to the upscale grocer to buy some salmon and vegetables. While I was picking out produce, my phone rang. Eleanor called, reminding me to come home early because relatives were dropping by. I rushed home and threw myself into cooking. The endless cycle of washing, seasoning, wiping, and pouring helped me avoid overthinking, but every pause brought my mind back to unsettled thoughts. That night, the relatives only stayed for a short while. Arthur played the perfect host. He poured drinks for his aunt and uncle, smiled at the right times, and asked all the right questions. Seeing my husband like that, who would believe there was an invisible, thickening wall between us? The most dangerous men aren't the ones who make the most money. They're the ones who make the world believe they are genuinely good men. I went to bed first. Outside the window, the wind rustled the barren oak trees. I sat at my vanity, took out my hair clips, and stared at my reflection. 34 years old. I wasn't old, just tired and devoid of a spark. Suddenly, I wondered exactly when I had stopped hoping my husband would look at me as a woman. Arthur came into the room much later. He placed his phone on the nightstand and went to shower. When he set it down, the screen lit up briefly. I only managed to see a message notification. No full name, just a single letter and some numbers. The message was short. "Same as usual tomorrow." Before I could look closer, he walked out, drying his hair with a towel. Seeing me sitting there, he grabbed his phone with a movement so quick it was meant to look entirely natural. That practiced, natural movement was what hurt the most. I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, "Who's texting you this late?" He pulled the duvet back and lay on the edge of the bed. "The warehouse manager, asking about tomorrow's shipments." "Just go to sleep. Stop overthinking." I turned off the lamp and lay down next to him. The distance between us was only an arm's length, but it felt like miles. He slept with his back to me, his breathing slow and steady. I lay with my eyes open in the dark, wondering how long a woman must stay silent before she has the right to trust her own instincts. In this room, the blankets were the same, the bed was big enough for two, but suddenly I felt like I was lying next to an early winter that had arrived indoors. The next morning, I didn't bring up the late-night text. Not because I forgot, but because I wanted to see clearly what the man sleeping next to me was hiding. In life, if you want to know how muddy the river is, you can't just stand on the bank and complain. You have to bend down and touch the bottom. Arthur left for work as usual. Before walking out, He adjusted his collar in the mirror, sprayed a little cologne, turned, and said, "I won't be home for lunch. Don't bother preparing anything." I stood near the shoe rack, handing him his trench coat. I asked softly, "Work has been really heavy lately, hasn't it?" He took the coat, his voice flat. "End of the year, lots of contracts. Just take care of Mom and the meals here, that's enough." It sounded innocuous, but the way he unconsciously divided our roles, he handled the big things out there, while I handled the little things at home, scraped against my heart. I used to stand on construction sites. I used to read blueprints. I used to debate material mixture ratios with him. But in just a few years of stepping back, all my knowledge had been reduced to 2 words in his eyes. Kitchen duty. After everyone left, the house felt massive. I cleaned, changed the bed sheets, wiped down tables, and went to the kitchen to prep a chicken soup for dinner. The smell of broth and black pepper suddenly reminded me of our early years in a tiny apartment. We didn't have much money then, but every evening after work, I was still excited to stop by the market and think of a menu my husband would love. Life is strange. Sometimes being poor feels warm, while having abundance makes everything freezing. Around 4 p.m., Arthur suddenly came home early. The sound of his BMW pulling into the driveway startled me. He walked in, carrying his dark brown leather briefcase, and spoke quickly. "I have to meet a client from Detroit tonight to finalize a rush order. I'm just changing my suit and heading back out." I looked at the clock, then at him. "You're home early." He gave a tight smile. "The meeting is tonight, so I had time to swing by." He went straight upstairs, leaving his briefcase on the living room sofa. I knew that briefcase well. I often helped him fetch documents, pens, or put aspirin in the side pockets. It was an object so familiar that no one would ever suspect it held a devastating truth. Upstairs, the shower turned on. Acting on instinct, I pulled the briefcase onto the coffee table, intending to look for a material proposal he had mentioned needing review days ago. It was a habit developed over years of making his life easier. A woman used to taking care of someone will continue to do so, even when she's hurting. I opened the main compartment. A laptop, stacks of files, a black leather planner, a business card holder. Immaculate, just like his outward appearance. I flipped through the papers, price quotes, shipping manifests, some dinner receipts, but didn't find what I was looking for. I reached for the side compartment. The zipper wasn't fully closed, leaving a gap about 2 fingers wide. I pulled it open. Inside was a pack of pocket tissues, an antacid packet, and a small object lying in the corner. When my fingertips brushed it, I couldn't guess what it was. It wasn't until I pulled it out that I saw it clearly. A brand new bottle of personal lubricant. The plastic seal was barely broken. I froze. The entire room went dead silent. The water upstairs was still running. The cars outside were still passing. The soup in the kitchen was likely still simmering. But in my head, there was only a thick, suffocating void. I stared at the object in my hand, feeling like I had accidentally grabbed someone else's property. In 5 years of marriage, Arthur and I had never used this. We had our normal intimate phases, like any couple. Then the intimacy faded. Less frequent, colder. But never once did something like this appear in our nightstand. My hands felt like ice. I put the bottle on the table, then picked it up again to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. It wasn't a free sample. It was something bought with a specific intention. And that intention did not exist within this marriage. All the puzzle pieces from the last few months suddenly snapped together into a cold, straight line. The late nights. The texts that flashed and vanished. The strange perfume on his collar. The way he turned his back to me on the phone. His bland touch in bed. None of it was just an insecure wife's paranoia. They were footprints marking the path he had quietly taken to walk out of my life. Strangely, I didn't cry. When pain is too massive, it doesn't make you scream. It freezes you, as if you've been drained of blood. I sat on the edge of the sofa, staring at the open briefcase. My heart pounded so hard my chest ached. In a split second, I even tried to lie to myself. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe he's holding it for a friend. But before the lie could fully form, I felt ridiculous. A man hides this in the side pocket of his daily briefcase and leaves it slightly unzipped? That wasn't an accident. That was because he was so used to my blind trust that he had let his guard down. It's true, women are sometimes defeated not because they are stupid, but because loving too much blinds them. Upstairs, the bathroom door opened. Startled, I shoved the bottle back into the exact same corner and zipped it to the exact same position. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the edge of the table to stand up. Just as I stepped away, Arthur came down. He had changed into a dark charcoal suit. His hair was damp, and the faint smell of shaving cream wafted over. He looked at me standing near the table and asked casually, "What were you looking for in my bag?" I turned, forcing my face to remain blank. "I was looking for the price proposal you mentioned." He stepped forward and grabbed the bag. "Don't worry about it. I'm meeting them in person tonight. I'll just ask directly." I looked up at him. At that moment, for the first time in my life, I felt like I was standing in front of a man who was both intimately familiar and a complete stranger. His face, his voice, his posture all the same. Only the trust inside me had just fallen down a bottomless well. I nodded. "All right, drive safe." He looked at me for an extra second, perhaps noticing my voice was slightly hoarse. But then he just took his bag and walked toward the door, leaving behind a clean, agonizing scent of cologne. I stood alone in the living room. The afternoon sunlight pierced through the window, casting long shadows on the floor. Outside, kids in the neighborhood called out to their friends. A perfectly normal afternoon for this city. Only inside me, something had shattered. No one heard it, but it was enough to tilt the axis of the entire world I had protected. Arthur grabbed his watch upstairs while I remained rooted to the living room floor. My ears felt stuffed with cotton. All I could see was that small bottle sitting in his briefcase. A wordless confession. I walked into the kitchen in a daze. On the rack near the sink, next to the plastic wrap and a sewing kit, sat a bottle of heavy-duty superglue I used to fix broken household items. It was an insignificant object, but today, my eyes locked onto it. I picked it up. My hands were freezing. Inside my head, two voices warred. One told me to put it down, not to do something stupid. The other screamed, bitter and furious. "He brought that to go have fun with another woman, while you stand here cooking, brewing tea, and making the bed like a good little doll. There comes a point where a woman's pride is trampled so heavily that the pain eclipses the love." I walked back to the living room and unzipped the side compartment one more time. My heart was beating like a war drum. I took out the lube bottle and unscrewed the cap. My fingertips trembled so violently I almost dropped both. Then, driven by a simultaneous wave of heat and ice, I squeezed several drops of superglue into the bottle, gently swirling it. The motion was incredibly fast, but it felt like a lifetime. Done. I grabbed a tissue, wiped the rim, screwed the cap back on, and placed it exactly where I found it. I even adjusted the zipper so it looked completely untouched. My own meticulousness terrified me. It turns out when pushed to the edge of a cliff, human beings can become frighteningly calm. Just as I sat back on the sofa, Arthur came down. He glanced at me. "Just prep dinner. I'll eat a little before I go." I walked into the kitchen without answering. The soup was still simmering. I plated the food, set down the silverware perfectly. Everything looked like a normal dinner, except the person preparing it was no longer the same. Arthur sat at the table, checking his phone while waiting for me to serve the rice. I set a bowl in front of him. He took a few bites and said, "This Detroit client is difficult. I might be late. Don't wait up." I stared at him longer than usual. Not an accusatory glare, not a pleading look, just a gaze deep enough to make myself realize how far away this man truly was. Perhaps sensing it, Arthur stopped eating and asked, "Why are you looking at me like that?" I smiled bitterly. "Nothing. I was just thinking that people who are truly busy always have a good excuse." He frowned but didn't press. Men can be strange. They are great at hiding, but slow to realize when someone has seen right through their mask. Arthur went back to his food. His Rolex gleamed under the lights. His shirt was crisp. An outsider would think he was a model husband eating a home-cooked meal before rushing off to provide for his family. It's true. The most terrifying villains in the world aren't the blatant criminals, but the wicked people who know how to wear nice clothes. After eating, he wiped his mouth, grabbed his briefcase, and headed for the door. Before stepping out, he turned and gave his usual line. "Make sure you lock the doors." "I will." I replied. The door clicked shut softly, but in my ears it sounded as heavy as a boulder. The house suddenly felt massive. Eleanor had already gone upstairs to watch TV. Ben wasn't home yet. Mia had texted the family group chat saying she was staying at a friend's place in the city tonight. I sat alone in the living room, the hum of the refrigerator, the occasional passing car, the ticking clock, all normal nighttime sounds that had suddenly become torture. I picked up my phone and put it down countless times. Sometimes I wanted to call him, curse at him, demand to know who she was. Sometimes I wanted to drive out, follow him, and catch him red-handed so he couldn't deny it. But I just sat there. Not because I forgave him, but because inside my chest was a bizarre mix of twisted satisfaction and suffocating anxiety. Around 9 p.m., I called him once. It rang for a long time. No answer. I sent a text. "Are you done with your meeting?" Delivered. But no reply. Until 11 p.m., I paced upstairs and downstairs. I poured hot water and didn't drink it. I turned the TV on and off. My entire body felt like it was burning from the inside, but my hands and feet were ice cold. At almost 2 a.m., when the streets were dead silent, my phone rang. An unknown number. I answered, and a hurried woman's voice came through. "Is this the family of Mr. Arthur Sterling?" "Yes." "We're calling from Northwestern Memorial Hospital. He is currently in the emergency room along with a female patient in a delicate condition. Could you please come immediately?" I froze. My entire back felt like a bucket of ice water had been poured over it. The phone almost slipped from my hand. At that moment, I knew there was no going back to the way things were. I don't remember putting on my coat, grabbing my keys, or getting into my SUV. Everything happened in a blur. All I knew was that as I sped down Lakeshore Drive, the freezing night wind whipped against my face. My hands shook violently on the steering wheel. The streets of Chicago at 2 a.m. were empty. Yellow streetlights stretched endlessly over the asphalt. My heart beat erratically. My chest felt crushed. The hospital staff's words echoed in my head. Along with a female patient in a delicate condition. Just a few words, but enough to make my worst nightmare real. I didn't know what I feared more. That Arthur was seriously injured. Or finding out who the woman was. Arriving at the ER, I parked haphazardly and sprinted inside. The midnight corridor was blindingly bright, smelling sharply of bleach. Hurried footsteps of nurses, rolling gurneys, the hum of the PA system. It was a dizzying chaos. I stopped near the triage desk. A nurse walked past, and I grabbed her arm. "Excuse me, I'm looking for Arthur Sterling. I'm his family." She glanced at me. "Are you his mother or his wife?" "I'm his wife." Her expression shifted. It was a look of instant pity and awkward comprehension. She pointed down a hallway. "Treatment room 4. The doctors are with them. Please wait outside." I walked on legs that felt like jelly. Approaching the room, I faintly heard someone whispering inside. "This is a tough one. Severe allergic-type reaction to a foreign substance." Another voice replied, "Keep it down. Family's outside." I stood paralyzed, my fingers gripping my purse strap. Delicate condition. I didn't need a medical degree to understand what that meant now. Right then, another nurse walked out carrying a stack of clipboards. The top paper shifted slightly, revealing bold, printed letters. I only managed to catch the name of the female patient admitted with Arthur. MIA. Sterling. I couldn't breathe. My body turned to stone. For a few seconds, I thought I was hallucinating. I blinked rapidly, staring as the clipboard disappeared down the hall. But the name was seared into my brain. Mia. Ben's wife. My sister-in-law. Not some random woman at a bar. Not a secretary. Not a client. Not a stranger I could freely curse out. It was the woman who lived in my house, who called me Rachel, sweetie, with a sickeningly sugary smile every day. Life delivers slaps that you simply cannot dodge. I took a step back, my spine hitting the cold wall. I didn't just feel betrayed. I felt as if someone had dumped raw sewage in the middle of our family living room. It was so vile my tongue went numb. Before I could collect myself, I heard frantic footsteps from the end of the hall. Ben came sprinting down. His jacket was half-zipped, his hair a mess, his face pale as a ghost. Seeing me, He rushed over, panting. Rachel, where's Mia? Why did the hospital call me and say my wife was in an emergency? Why is Arthur here too? I opened my mouth, but my throat locked. Never had an answer been so excruciating to deliver. I looked at Ben, at his genuine panic, and my heart tasted like ash. It turned out, I wasn't the only one in that house being played for a fool. Before I could speak, the treatment room doors swung open. A doctor stepped out, pulling down his mask. Family members for the two patients? Ben and I both stepped forward. The doctor looked at us. Relationship? Ben spoke first. I'm Mia's husband. My chest tightened. With agonizing effort, I choked out, I'm Arthur's wife. The doctor paused. That brief, deafening silence was more humiliating than a slap. He maintained his professionalism. Neither patient is in life-threatening danger. However, the areas of contact sustained tissue damage due to an abnormal reaction to an unknown foreign substance. We have separated them and require further observation. It was medical jargon, but any adult would know exactly what he meant. Ben stumbled backward, leaning against the wall. His lips trembled, his eyes wide in absolute disbelief. I just stood there, glued to the linoleum. Tonight, the little bottle of gel in that briefcase wasn't just used for a standard affair. It was used to defile our own family. Less than 10 minutes later, Eleanor arrived. She had thrown a dark trench coat over her pajamas, her hair in a messy bun, panting heavily. Where is Arthur? What happened? Ben looked at her. His mouth opened and closed, not knowing where to begin. Before I could say a word, nurses wheeled a gurney out of the room. Lying on it was Arthur. His face was deathly pale, eyes squeezed shut, jaw locked, sweating profusely. You could tell he was in agonizing pain. Right behind him was the second gurney. Mia was curled on her side, her hair plastered to her sweaty cheeks, tears soaking her pillow. In that instant, Ben lost his mind. He lunged forward, his voice a guttural roar. Mia! Why are you here? With Arthur? What did you do? Mia opened her eyes, saw her husband, then saw me. She immediately turned her face away, unable to meet my gaze. But Ben screamed louder. Answer me! Amidst the chaos, Eleanor suddenly turned to me. Maybe it was the shock, the crushing shame, or maybe in her twisted mind, the daughter-in-law was always the easiest scapegoat. She raised her hand and slapped me hard across the face. You are his wife! How did you let your husband end up like this? The crack of the slap echoed in the bright corridor. I stumbled a half step. My cheek burned like fire. A few bystanders turned to look. I held my cheek, unable to cry. The physical pain was secondary. The true agony was that, while her entire bloodline was being humiliated in a public hospital, she chose to strike me first. I looked at my mother-in-law, seeing with crystal clarity exactly how the scales of justice worked in her house. Right then, Mia's voice cut through. It was shaky, but sharp enough to slice. I'm not the only one to blame. If Arthur was actually happy with Rachel, this wouldn't have happened. Her words were gasoline on a raging fire. Ben screamed, lunging at Arthur's gurney, grabbing his own brother by the hospital gown. You're my brother! How could you do this to me? The nurses rushed in to pry him off. The doctor yelled for security. Eleanor collapsed into a plastic chair, her lips trembling. And as I stood in the middle of that freezing corridor, I realized that tonight, the pristine, image-obsessed house I had lived in had been completely demolished. I left the hospital as dawn broke. The Chicago sky was a dreary gray, like an old dish towel thrown over the skyline. Coffee carts and food trucks were setting up on the sidewalks. The city was preparing for a new day. I felt like I had been dragged behind a car through the longest night of my life, my bones pulverized. Arriving home, I didn't go upstairs. I walked straight into the kitchen. The remnants of last night's dinner were still on the table under a cover. The casserole was cold. The gravy had congealed. The chair Arthur had sat in was still slightly pulled out. Everything was exactly as it was when that man picked up his briefcase and walked out the door. I sat in the chair opposite his, hands on my knees. My left cheek still stung from Eleanor's slap. My mind replayed the hospital scenes on a loop. Arthur's pale face, Mia's sweaty hair, Ben's empty eyes. The doctor's whisper. Thinking about it made my stomach churn. Then, like a slow blade, I remembered my own hands. I remembered perfectly how I opened that lube bottle, squeezed the glue, wiped the rim, and placed it back. My whole body went cold. I wasn't satisfied. I realized then that I didn't feel the triumph I had imagined. I wasn't happy seeing him in pain. I wasn't thrilled seeing the two traitors humiliated. The emotion hitting me the hardest was panic. Panic that I had done something unhinged. Panic that my fingerprints were on their suffering. Panic that if I kept going like this, I would lose whatever was left of my sanity. Anger is like a fire. If unchecked, it burns down your own house first. I sat in front of the cold food for a long time. No tears. My throat was parched, my hands freezing. Outside, a sparrow landed on the porch railing and flew off. Dawn comes. Regardless of how humiliatingly a family shatters in the night. Around 6:30 a.m., Eleanor arrived. She came through the side door. Her shoulders sagged. Her silk scarf was crooked. She didn't look at me. She gripped a dining chair and collapsed into it like a sailor surviving a shipwreck. I stood up to pour her a glass of water, but she waved me off. After a long silence, she spoke. Her voice was raspy from exhaustion. What happened last night? No one else in the family can know. If the neighbors ask, say Arthur had a medical emergency, and Mia was just giving him a ride to the ER. I turned to look at her. If this had happened years ago, I would have nodded, brainwashed into believing the family's image had to be preserved at all costs. But today, after taking a slap in an ER corridor, hearing her first instinct be a cover-up just made me bone-tired. I answered slowly. We can lie to the outside world. But what about the people inside this house, Eleanor? She snapped her head up, glaring at me. Don't talk back to me. This house is in chaos. If we blow this up, who wins? I smiled. A smile so bitter I could taste it. Last night at the hospital, the person who got slapped was me. The person asked which woman her husband was having an emergency with was me. She paused, looking away. I was panicking. But a woman is only truly great if she can keep her husband. You're so rigid. It's natural for a man to get bored. That sentence hit me harder than the physical slap. I stared at this woman so revered by her social circle for her grace, and finally saw the rotten logic that nurtured the injustice in her home. Her son slept with his own sister-in-law, yet her first instinct was to blame her daughter-in-law for not being soft enough. Around 9 a.m., Ben came home. He pushed the door open like a battering ram. His eyes were bloodshot, his clothes wrinkled, smelling strongly of stale alcohol and cigarette smoke. Seeing me in the kitchen, he froze. His look was a mix of shame, anger, and evasion. Ben and I were never close, but we had maintained a sibling-in-law rapport. Now, we stood looking at each other like two people stabbed by the same knife in different places. He rasped, "Rachel." I go upstairs. I cut him off, not wanting to dive into it yet. Get some rest. You look awful. Ben clenched his fists. His jaw locked, and he punched the doorframe hard. I'm a fucking idiot, Rachel. An idiot! Eleanor shouted from the living room. Why are you making a scene this early in the morning? Ben whirled around, eyes blazing. How can you be calm right now, Mom? What the hell is left in this house to be calm about? Eleanor stood up. Is that how you speak to your mother? Ben let out a dry, cracked laugh. I lost my wife. I lost my pride. I lost my brother. And you're asking me about my tone? He shoved a chair out of his way and stormed upstairs. A second later, a door slammed violently. For the rest of the day, the house drowned in a thick, toxic silence. No one ate. I made some basic chicken soup, put it on the table, but I was the only one who forced down a few spoonfuls. Eleanor sat by the phone, jumping every time it rang, fielding questions with hushed tones, desperately doing damage control. Ben locked himself in his room. I only saw him come down once in the afternoon to grab a bottle of whiskey before retreating again. Mia sent one text to the family group chat. I'm staying at my parents' house. No apology. No explanation. She didn't call me Rachel, sweetie. Just one dry sentence, retreating to safety while our house burned. Arthur was kept at the hospital for observation. That evening, my phone buzzed. His name lit up the screen. I stared at it for a long time before answering. His voice was hoarse, much weaker than usual. Rachel, I want to see you. What for? I asked, my voice flat as a board. He paused. We need to talk. I leaned back in my chair, watching dead leaves swirl in the autumn wind outside. A month ago, hearing him sound so weak would have broken my heart. Today, my heart was encased in ash. When you get discharged, we'll talk. Rachel, please, just listen to me this once I closed my eyes, then opened them. I've listened to you for years. This time, I get to choose when I want to hear it. I hung up. At that moment, I knew I had crossed a threshold. I wasn't calm enough to forgive, nor wise enough to map out my entire future. But one thing was certain. If I let my emotions drive the car, I would be the biggest loser in this game. To survive, I needed the whole truth. Not just about the lube in the briefcase, not just about last night, but everything that man had hidden from me. 2 days later, Arthur was discharged. Eleanor announced it in the morning, trying to sound normal, as if her son had just recovered from the flu, not a perverse family scandal. She even instructed me, when he gets home, speak nicely to your husband. Family issues should be resolved behind closed doors. I didn't answer. For 2 days, I had operated like a machine. Cooking, doing laundry, watering the orchids, changing the water in the vases. The busier I was, the less my mind spun. I knew I couldn't dodge the conversation forever. That afternoon, the temperature dropped sharply. The biting wind of early winter rattled the window panes. Arthur arrived home around 4 p.m. He walked slower than usual. He still looked pale. Eleanor rushed to the door. Come in, honey. Are you still in pain? I'm feeling better, Mom, he replied softly. I was in the kitchen, chopping scallions. I heard every word, but my hands kept moving rhythmically. He walked in, scanned the room, and locked eyes with me. It was brief, but I knew he was trying to read my reaction. I didn't look away, nor did I stare. I simply put the knife down, washed my hands, and walked to the dining table to pour a glass of water. Eleanor chimed in. Rachel, bring your husband some water. I slid the glass across the table toward him. My voice was flat. Drink. He took it. His fingers were stiff. After years of marriage, I knew every micro-expression this man had. The more nervous he was, the calmer he tried to appear. Dinner that evening felt as heavy as lead. Ben didn't come down. Eleanor complained about the upcoming family Thanksgiving dinner, talking about what to prep, trying to normalize the atmosphere. I looked up. This disaster didn't just fall from the sky, Eleanor. She froze, her face hardening. What do you mean? I picked up a fork. The person who commits the sin bears the responsibility. God doesn't force anyone into the wrong bed. Arthur slammed his fist on the table. Rachel! I looked at him coolly. Did I say something incorrect? Silence. Only the clinking of silverware, louder than usual. Eleanor quickly changed the subject, asking me what I planned to cook tomorrow. I found it hilarious. So many wealthy families are like this. As long as the dining table is set and polite greetings are exchanged, they believe the filth underneath will magically vanish. But a rotting corpse wrapped in silk still smells like death. After dinner, Eleanor retreated to her room early, giving me a look that screamed, now is the time to talk it out. I washed the dishes methodically. When I walked into the living room, Arthur was sitting on the sofa, hands clasped, braced for a difficult conversation. He started. Sit down. Let's talk this through. I sat across from him, separated by the coffee table. I'm sorry, he said. I said nothing. He continued. What happened? It was a massive mistake. I know you're hurt. But I swear, it's not what you think. I let out a dry, broken laugh. Not what I think? Or worse than I think? He frowned, trying to soften his tone. Rachel, listen. My thing with Mia. It was a moment of weakness. I have no feelings for her. A moment of weakness. I repeated the words slowly. A moment of weakness that ended up in the ER? A moment of weakness that involved stashing supplies in your work briefcase? You picked a time, a place, and the tools. Do you even believe your own bullshit? Arthur clenched his jaw. Think whatever you want. But honestly, Mia came on to me lately. She's been complaining about how miserable she is with Ben. I slipped up once. Hearing that made me feel physically sick. This man just slept with his brother's wife. And now he was sitting in front of his own wife, entirely lucid, trying to pin the blame on the other woman. Did you trip and fall into her hotel room? I asked. Stop being so sarcastic. He snapped. Since the night you slept with her, this house has become a circus. And I was the last to know. I shot back. He went quiet for a few seconds. His voice grew exhausted. I don't want to lose this family. I still love you. I still see you as my wife. If this blows up, my mother won't survive it. Ben is a loose cannon. The company has massive contracts closing. One leaked rumor, and it all goes to hell. You know how my mother's health is. If she collapses, who takes the blame? I listened to him, my throat tasting like bile. Ultimately, this was what he feared. His mother's health? His brother's wrath? His company's stock? His social standing? Everything around him. Meanwhile, nah! The woman betrayed in her own home was just a variable to be managed. And me? I asked softly. Do you just assume I'm bulletproof? He looked at me, but his gaze didn't reach my pain. I know you're hurting. That's why I'm asking for a chance to fix it. I gritted my teeth. Are you asking for a chance because you love me? Or because you're terrified of losing the picture-perfect image I built for you? He went dead silent. You know you've hit the nerve when they stop talking. He stood up, stepping closer. I admit I was wrong. But we've built a life together. Are you really going to burn it all down? I stood up to meet his eyes. Whether it burns or not, you struck the match. It was one mistake. I stared at him without blinking. A man who gets lost on his way home knows how to bow his head in shame. But you? You got lost, yet still remembered to organize your briefcase, hide your phone, invent a client in Detroit, and sit down to eat my pot roast like nothing happened. That's not getting lost. That's a routine. Right then, Eleanor came downstairs. She had either been eavesdropping or couldn't stand the quiet. Are you two done? Fighting won't solve anything. We're not fighting, Eleanor. I'm just listening to your son's apologies, I said coldly. She took a deep breath, falling back on her old rhetoric. A woman's strength is knowing when to let things go. The damage is done. Now you fix it. If you destroy this marriage, what do you even get out of it? I looked at her, no longer backing down. You're asking what I get out of it? At the very least, I won't have to cook dinner for a traitor every night. Her face flushed dark red. You are insolent. Arthur reached out as if to mediate. Mom, enough I haven't even started being insolent. I cut him off, my voice chillingly calm. If I were insolent, I would have spoken my mind in that ER corridor. Eleanor glared at me, her lips sealed tight. I knew that from this moment on, I was no longer her obedient daughter-in-law. But strangely, I wasn't afraid. When you're pushed against a wall, the scariest thing isn't losing the approval of others, it's continuing to betray yourself. Arthur stared at me, a mix of exhaustion and anxiety on his face. It was as if he finally realized the wife who had patiently stood behind him all these years was no longer standing in the same spot. He wasn't hurting because he hurt me. He was just trying to salvage his assets. That night, after everyone went to their rooms, I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. I wasn't panicking anymore. A solid thought took root in my mind. If you want to know who you're dealing with, you can't just listen to their words. To untangle a knot, you have to find the loose end. I needed someone clear-headed, clean, and trustworthy to help me see the full picture. The next morning, I woke up early. I put on a crisp cream blazer, tied my hair back neatly, grabbed my purse, and left the house. I was meeting Brian at an indie coffee shop in Wicker Park. Brian was an old college classmate from my engineering days. He didn't talk much, but he had a razor-sharp mind. I had heard he transitioned into corporate investigation, specializing in tracing financial trails and internal personnel issues for companies in litigation. We weren't the type of friends who texted every day, but we understood each other. The cafe was empty. The smell of roasted beans and old wood calmed my nerves. Brian arrived 10 minutes later, tall, lean, wearing thin-rimmed glasses. He looked at me and said simply, "You've lost weight. I didn't call you here for a wellness check." I smiled bitterly. He sat down with a black coffee. "Tell me." I gave him the concise, brutal version. The briefcase, the hospital at 2 a.m., the medical records, the mother-in-law's slap, Arthur's apology. I didn't embellish to save face. The more I spoke, the drier my throat got, but I didn't break down. Brian tapped his coffee cup. "Do you want to know about his private life? Or do you want to know everything?" I looked out the window at the Chicago traffic. Everything. Relationships, money, the company, schedules, whatever is there, I want it. He nodded. "Okay. But once I open this up, you might see things much harder to swallow than what you know now." "I'm already choking," I said. "Bring it on." From there, I went straight to the downtown law office of Aaron Pierce. Aaron was a few years older than me, a former study group peer who had become a ruthless corporate and civil litigator. Aaron had a clinical clarity that was deeply uncomfortable for someone needing a shoulder to cry on, but exactly what you needed when going to war. After hearing my story, Aaron didn't offer a single word of comfort. He pushed up his glasses, opened his notepad, and said bluntly, "Infidelity will get you a favorable divorce settlement, but to truly crush a man like Arthur, we have to hold his financials." "You mean the company?" Aaron nodded. "Exactly. Guys like him aren't afraid of a wife's tears. They're afraid of paper trails. If it's just a bedroom issue, he'll leverage his mother, his family name, and your pride to force you to swallow it. But if you threaten his throne, he'll show his true face." That unlocked a door in my brain. I had always thought Arthur's weak point was the family's pristine image. But beneath that was money, position, and corporate power. And it wasn't like I was ignorant of those things. I used to draft technical proposals with him. I corrected specifications for Apex Materials' flagship product lines. It was just that I had stepped back for so long, I had almost forgotten what I knew. Aaron closed his notepad. "Step 1. Don't make him suspicious. Let him think you're just heartbroken, confused, and slow to react. Step 2. Gather everything you ever saved, technical proposals, patents, old emails. Step 3. Let Brian trace the money and the people. You just remember one thing. From now on, do not act out of anger." I nodded. Stepping out onto the windy streets of the Loop, my head felt clearer than it had in months. Back home, I still wore my apron, cooked, and poured tea for Eleanor. I listened to her passive-aggressive comments about keeping the peace. I watched Ben sulk like a ghost on the stairs. But internally, my battle stance had shifted. That afternoon, I went down to the basement and opened a dusty cardboard box filled with old documents I hadn't touched in years. The smell of old paper and ink was familiar. I sat on the concrete floor, flipping through technical manuals, contracts, and blueprints, running my hands over the pages as if touching a forgotten piece of my own soul. I didn't want to ask Arthur why anymore. I wanted to know how much filth was hiding under this roof. 3 days later, Brian texted me around noon. "Meet me. Found something you need to see." I told Eleanor I was going out to buy her vitamins, and took an Uber to a quiet diner near the lakefront. Brian brought a thin folder and a black USB drive. He didn't waste time. He slid his phone across the table. "Look." On the screen were telephoto pictures. Photo 1. Arthur getting out of his car at a luxury condo building in the South Loop. Photo 2. Walking beside him was a woman in a cream trench coat, tall, impeccably styled, wearing oversized sunglasses. Photo 3. They were in an elevator together, standing so close it was undeniably intimate. I stared at the woman, and my heart stopped. "Sarah?" I rasped. Brian nodded. "The CFO of Apex Materials." I set the phone down slowly. If Mia was a slap to my family pride, Sarah was a knife twisting in my gut. I knew this woman. Not well, but well enough. She was a few years older, strictly professional, always smelled of expensive perfume. Whenever I visited the office, she politely called me Rachel, keeping perfect boundaries. She was the ultimate image controller. "Turns out my husband likes to compartmentalize," I smiled grimly. "One for the dirty thrills at home, one to manage the money and power outside." Brian opened the folder, pulling out bank statements. The condo is under a Shell LLC, but the interior design and HOA fees are paid from a secondary account Arthur controls. Plus, charges for luxury watches, designer bags, and spa treatments. It's not a fling. It's a parallel life. I stared at the cold, hard numbers. $15,000, $25,000, $50,000. Sums that I, as a housewife, would calculate 3 times before spending on the family. My husband transferred them as easily as brushing dust off his sleeve. How long? I asked. Paper trail says at least a year and a half. Probably longer. A year and a half, I laughed a thin, icy sound. So while I was organizing family Thanksgiving dinners, caring for his sick mother, and scrubbing his baseboards, he had built an entire alternate reality behind my back. I realized then that a woman's greatest fear isn't that her husband loves someone else. It's realizing she was only ever cast as an extra in her own life to make the staging look good. Brian pushed a cup of coffee toward me. You okay? I'm so fine it terrifies me, I replied. What else? Brian paused. There are signs of corporate embezzlement. I see overlapping personal and corporate expenses. The money isn't clean. I need more time to break the shell companies. Keep going, I said, sipping the bitter coffee. I don't care how many women he's sleeping with anymore. I want to know the massive crater he's hiding from me. The next day, Brian called me back to the same diner. This time, his face was grim. He turned his laptop toward me. It showed a spreadsheet of payouts from Apex Materials over the last 2 years to various logistics subcontractors. Look at the vendor names. To the naked eye, they're normal suppliers, but look at the margins. The contracts are inflated. The inventory received doesn't match the invoices. The cash flows through 3 layers of intermediaries and is withdrawn. Arthur gave the final approval on these. Sarah initialed them as CFO. I stared at the names. They weren't just sleeping together, they were looting the company. What about Ben? I asked. Brian zoomed in. Ben's signature is on the receiving logs. But from what I see, he's the fall guy. He's the guy who blindly signs whatever is put in front of him. I sat in silence. Ben was hot-headed and arrogant, but he wasn't a criminal mastermind. Aaron was right. Infidelity was the match. This was the powder keg. Instead of going home, I stopped at Office Max. I bought clear binders, labels, and a Sharpie. I looked like a normal suburban housewife buying school supplies. But in my head, a noose was tightening. I no longer wondered why he betrayed me. I wondered, how exactly has he used me? That evening, I pulled the boxes back out in the basement. I sorted the old proposals, the technical manuals, the patents. I opened a faded blue folder containing the proprietary chemical procedures for Apex's heat-resistant coating, the very product that won them their biggest municipal contracts. On the first page, the primary engineering author was listed clearly. Rachel Vance, my maiden name. I froze. I opened the next folder. The waterproofing formula, the material stabilization specs. Some were joint projects, but the core IP was mine. I remembered Arthur saying sweetly years ago, let's just keep it under your name for now, to protect it from corporate espionage. We'll transfer it to the company later. I believed him. I thought my husband was protecting our future. Sitting in the dust, the truth crushed me. He had used my brain to build his corporate empire, and then systematically pushed me into the kitchen until I believed my only worth was cooking his meals. That night at dinner, Arthur sat there looking immaculate. He asked Eleanor about her medication, reminded Ben about inventory, and told me to wear a warmer coat. It was horrifying. A man who could sign off on dirty corporate fraud at 2 p.m. could come home and serve his mother mashed potatoes at 7 p.m. Arthur, I asked softly, do you still have the old files for the heat-resistant coating proposal? He stiffened, just for a second. Why? I was feeling bored. Thought I'd read through them to refresh my memory on my old work. He smirked condescendingly. The company's tech is way past that now. You wouldn't even understand it. I put my fork down. I wouldn't understand it? Or you don't want me to understand it? Eleanor's head snapped up. Ben stopped eating. The room went dead. Arthur's eyes narrowed with genuine suspicion. I just looked back at him, feeling an unnatural calm. They say when a woman is shattered, she either turns to dust or turns to steel. I was rapidly becoming the latter. The next morning, I wore a tailored gray blazer over a white silk blouse and pulled my hair into a sleek bun. I looked in the mirror, not to check my makeup, but to see the face of the woman walking back into the corporate world after years in exile. Eleanor saw me leaving. "Where are you going dressed like that?" "I'm dropping by the office, Eleanor." She frowned. "Things are chaotic enough there. Don't go making a scene." "I'm not making a scene," I smiled politely. "I'm just picking up what belongs to me." Apex Materials was housed in a sleek, 4-story glass building in downtown Chicago. Entering the lobby, the receptionist looked shocked. "Mrs. Sterling?" "The executive floor is, do you have an appointment?" "No need," I said firmly. "Tell Sarah I'm here to see her." Within 5 minutes of waiting, I saw employees peeking out of their glass cubicles. They knew about the hospital incident. They were waiting for the hysterical wife to scream and throw things. The elevator dinged. Sarah stepped out. Pencil skirt, silk blouse, immaculate hair, smelling of cold ambition. She smiled a practiced, polite smile. "Rachel, what a surprise. I need to speak with you. If this is a personal matter, the office isn't the place," she said smoothly. I looked her dead in the eye. "Don't worry. I'm not here to talk about who you're sleeping with." Her smile faltered. She gestured me into a small conference room and closed the glass door. She sat, crossing her legs. "What do you want?" I pulled 3 labeled binders from my bag and dropped them on the table. "I'm here to inform you that the core patents and procedures for the heat-resistant and waterproofing product lines are still legally registered under my name." Sarah barely blinked, but her posture stiffened. "You're mistaken. The company has full legal rights to those assets. I don't care if the company is using them. I care who owns the intellectual property rights." She opened the first binder. I saw her wrist tense when she saw my name on the filings. She closed it and sneered. "Personal vendettas should remain personal, Rachel. The company is busy." "I agree," I smiled. "That's why I brought legal documents, not tears." "What do you want?" Her voice dropped its fake warmth. "I want the company to formally recognize my IP rights and compensate me, or I will file an injunction to halt the use of these technologies immediately." Silence. For the first time, Sarah looked at me not as a scorned housewife, but as a financial liability capable of derailing her career. The door burst open. Arthur walked in. "Rachel, what the hell are you doing here? Reminding you that before I was your wife, I was the engineer who built the foundation of this company. Go home. We'll talk later," he hissed. "At home, you use your mouth." "Today, I'm using paper," I replied. Arthur sat down, his calm facade crumbling. "You're taking this too far." "Too far? Demanding my legal rights is too far?" Sarah chimed in. "If you do this, our main product line will take a massive hit. You need to think about the collateral damage." "I have," I said softly. "That's exactly why I'm here." 15 minutes later, Mr. Sterling, a major board member and family elder, was called into the room. He walked in, demanding to know why there was a standoff. I stood up respectfully. "Mr. Sterling, I merely wanted to clarify that critical tech used by Apex is legally mine. If my rights are ignored, I will pursue federal litigation." Mr. Sterling looked at the documents. A man driven purely by profit doesn't care about family drama. He cares about leverage. His demeanor shifted instantly. He glared at Arthur. "This needs to be resolved. Now, no games." Arthur's fists were clenched on the table. Sarah looked sick. I gathered my binders, smoothed my blazer, and walked out. Walking through the bullpen, the employees' stares had changed. It wasn't pity anymore. It was fear. I felt like I had finally reclaimed my actual name. 2 days later, Brian texted me. "Got a weird financial trail. Let's meet." We met at a quiet cafe near Navy Pier. The sky was gloomy, the lake choppy and gray. Brian handed me an envelope with bank statements. "Look at this secondary account. Arthur's been wiring money every month. $5,000, $8,000, once up to $40,000. It's going to a pediatric hospital facility in South Bend, Indiana." "Hospital bills?" Brian nodded. "Patient is an 8-year-old boy named Noah." My chest tightened. An 8-year-old boy. Routine payments from my husband. The most humiliating conclusion jumped to my mind. A secret child. I was being buried alive in a marriage where my husband had an entire secret family. Is the mother there? I asked sharply. No. Raised by an elderly grandmother. Arthur just pays the bills and visits occasionally. I don't have photos yet, but the money trail is solid. I need to go there myself, I said. I told Eleanor I was going to visit a friend in Michigan for a day. I took a Greyhound bus to South Bend. The drive through the gray, rusting industrial towns matched my mood. The hospital was an older brick building. The pediatric ward smelled of bleach and cafeteria food. I found Noah's room. He was a frail boy, pale, hair thinning from treatments. An older woman, around 60, sat by his bed peeling an apple. Excuse me, are you Noah's family? I asked softly. The grandmother looked up warily. Yes. Who are you? I'm from Chicago. Someone asked me to check on him. She offered me a plastic chair. Noah looked at me with huge, sorrowful eyes. Children who are chronically ill look older than they are. Seeing this fragile boy, all my prepared anger evaporated. He was innocent. Are you Noah? I asked. He nodded weakly. Yes, ma'am. The grandmother slowly told me the story. Noah had a blood disorder. Years ago, a woman dropped him off when he got very sick and vanished. The grandmother raised him. A man from Chicago paid the bills, visited rarely, but never claimed to be the father. It was classic Arthur, doing just enough to maintain his self-righteous image, but never truly taking responsibility. As I sat there, Noah spoke up. You look like the lady in Grandma's picture. I froze. What picture? The grandmother pulled an old, worn envelope from her tote bag and handed it to me. Old photos his mother left behind. I pulled out the faded photos, and my heart slammed against my ribs. The first photo showed a group of men at a construction site. On the left, wearing a hard hat, smiling warmly, was my father. My hands went numb. I pulled the second photo. A younger woman, who looked strikingly like me, sitting at a diner. My mother. The hospital room faded away. The beeping monitors, the hallway chatter, it all vanished into a suffocating vacuum. I looked at Noah. The shape of his eyes, his nose, it was a genetic echo of my mother's side of the family. Noah wasn't Arthur's secret child. I couldn't speak. The anger I brought from Chicago mutated into something much darker and colder. I promised Noah I would come back, stumbled out of the ward, and called Brian from the freezing parking lot. Pull every record on the Apex Logistics warehouse built in South Bend 10 years ago, I ordered. Everything from the ground up. I returned to Chicago that night. Eleanor asked where I'd been. I muttered about traffic and went straight to my room. The next morning, Brian sent me an encrypted file. Read this alone, his message said. The first file was about the Apex warehouse construction in Indiana a decade ago. My father had been an independent safety inspector on that site. He died when a scaffolding collapsed. I had always believed it was a tragic workplace accident, but the documents on my screen made my blood run cold. The specs showed high-grade steel was billed, but field notes showed cheap, substandard materials were actually used. A safety report had its dates altered. An internal email discussed cutting structural supports to optimize costs, and a sworn affidavit from an old foreman stated that the scaffolding was known to be unstable, but upper management ordered the inspection to proceed to meet deadlines. My father was murdered by corporate greed. The second file was worse. 8 months after his death, my mother had quietly filed a complaint with the state board, attaching material discrepancies. It was buried due to lack of evidence. Shortly after, she was killed in a hit-and-run near a bus station. Everyone said it was tragic bad luck. Did you read it? Brian called me. Are they connected? I choked out. The timeline is dirty, Brian said softly. And the Apex executive coordinating with your dad back then was an associate of Arthur's family. Arthur himself was frequently in South Bend right after the accident. My phone nearly cracked in my grip. After my mother died, Arthur was the one who swooped in. He helped me with the funeral, the paperwork, the lawyers. He was my rock when I was drowning. I fell in love with my savior. Now, staring at the screen, I realized the horrifying truth. My marriage was a containment strategy. He married me to silence me, to control the daughter of the man his family's negligence had killed. That night, Arthur came home playing the role of the stressed but dutiful husband. I looked at him, feeling an icy detachment. He wasn't just a cheater. He was a monster wearing a human suit. I went down to the basement, lit a candle next to an old photo of my parents, and made a silent vow. I was going to burn his entire world to the ground. It was raining heavily the next night. Ben burst through the kitchen door. He was soaked, smelling of alcohol, but for the first time, he looked sober in his despair. He sat across from me at the kitchen island. "I thought you'd hate me forever," he rasped. "I hate people who know the truth and still play dirty," I said, sliding a mug of hot tea toward him. "I haven't decided which one you are." Ben put his head in his hands. "I've lost everything. My wife, my pride. In this house, I was always Arthur's shadow. Mom loved him more. He was the genius. I was the screw-up. But I'm starting to realize he intentionally kept me in the dark so I'd take the fall." "What do you know, Ben?" He swallowed hard. "In logistics, he made me sign off on rush orders. I noticed the inventory numbers were faked. He told me to just sign and let him handle it. I thought it was just cooking the books for tax reasons." He hit the counter. "I'm such an idiot. How bad is it? A year ago, I overheard him fighting with Sarah. Sarah said, 'If the South Bend documents leak, we're all going to prison.' Arthur told her to bury it. After you showed up at the office, Sarah started wiping hard drives. I saw her packing files into a lockbox. The puzzle was complete. Arthur was panicking. Sarah was destroying evidence. 'Why are you telling me this?' I asked. Ben looked at me, his eyes bloodshot but resolute. 'Because I don't want to go down for his crimes. If I tell the truth now—' "Does it matter?" "It saves your conscience," I said. I called Aaron, put him on speaker, and briefed him. Aaron was blunt. "Separate the cases. Divorce for the infidelity. Fraud and criminal negligence for the business. Ben, are you willing to testify?" Ben stared at the speakerphone. "I am." "Don't sign anything else. Write down every date, every conversation, every document," Aaron ordered. I slid a notepad and pen to Ben. In the quiet kitchen, accompanied only by the rain, the sound of a pen scratching paper marked the true collapse of the Sterling family empire. The final board meeting took place on a gray afternoon in the main conference room at Apex Materials. Mr. A. APX Materials. Sterling had called it to address the operational risks rumors. Everyone knew it was an execution. Arthur sat at the head, Sarah to his right. Eleanor sat in the back, clutching her Chanel bag like a life preserver. Ben sat opposite Arthur, refusing to make eye contact. I sat beside my lawyer, Aaron. Aaron dropped a massive stack of files on the table. "We will begin with the personal liabilities." He projected the hospital records, the condo deeds, the luxury charges. Eleanor turned her face away in shame at the mention of Mia. Sarah kept a poker face, but her fingers twitched. "Personal matters do not belong here," Arthur growled. "They do, when company funds are used to maintain them," Aaron countered. "Next, the embezzlement, the shell companies, the inflated invoices, Arthur's approvals, Sarah's initials, Ben's stamps." Mr. Sterling slammed his hand on the table. "You call this a procedural error?" Arthur tried to deflect. "This is accounting's domain. Sarah drafted these." Sarah turned on him instantly. "I only initialed what the COO explicitly approved." The rats were turning on each other. Then, Ben stood up. He tossed his handwritten notebook onto the table. "Stop blaming everyone else, Arthur. You used me to sign dirty logs. I heard you and Sarah talking about the South Bend cover-up. You slept with my wife, and now you want me to take the fall for your fraud. You're drunk. Shut your mouth," Arthur roared. "I'm the most sober I've ever been," Ben fired back. Aaron laid down the final folder. The South Bend warehouse. The altered safety reports. The link to my father's death. Arthur lost his mind. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "You know nothing. You're a housewife who thinks reading a few old papers makes you an expert." I stood up. The room fell dead silent. I didn't feel hurt. I felt absolute zero ice. "Yes, I was at home," I said softly, staring right into his soul. "But every heat-resistant spec, every waterproofing formula that won this company its millions was written by me. I was foolish enough to trust you, but I am not stupid enough to let you play me forever. Arthur stared at me. The arrogant CEO was gone. In his eyes was the raw, naked terror of a man who realized the woman he had kept as a pet was actually a wolf holding his leash. The meeting ended with Miss Sterling suspending Arthur, initiating a forensic audit, and freezing the finance department. Eleanor looked hollowed out. That night, Arthur came home late. He looked like a corpse. He sat across from me in the dining room and asked, "Did you have to take it this far?" I peeled a hard-boiled egg. How far is too far? Far enough to stop covering for a murderer? He clenched his fists. Give me a way out, Rachel. I looked at the man who had stolen my patents, drained my bank accounts, slept with my sister-in-law, and covered up the deaths of my parents. And he was still asking me for a favor. If you had ever left a genuine path open for me, today would be different, I whispered. I stood up and walked away. The marriage was dead. Days later, Aaron filed the divorce papers. The fraud and negligence documents were handed over to the FBI and the SEC. Sarah was isolated and flipped on Arthur to save herself. Mia moved out of state, her reputation ruined. Ben checked into a facility to get clean, promising to cooperate with the feds. Eleanor called me into her room one last time. She was weeping. Was I wrong, Rachel? Your mistake wasn't just one thing, Eleanor. Your mistake was loving one son so blindly that you demanded everyone else bleed to keep him comfortable. She sobbed, finally facing the rot in her perfect home. A week later, I drove back to South Bend. Noah was sitting up in bed, looking a little brighter. You came back, he smiled. I promised, I said, handing him a bag of comic books. I no longer saw him as a symbol of betrayal, but as a victim of the same careless men who had destroyed my family. I would make sure the trust fund I set up from my patent royalties took care of him. On the drive back to Chicago, I stopped at the cemetery where my parents were buried. The autumn wind swept through the dead leaves, carrying the scent of damp earth. I stood before their headstones for a long time. I used to think I was cursed to lose my parents, then blessed to find a savior. Now I knew that true salvation doesn't come from a man offering you a golden cage. It comes from yourself. I touched the cold stone and whispered, I'm out of the dark now. I'll take it from here. From a woman standing at the stove, biting her tongue to keep the peace, I had walked through hell to understand one truth. Swallowing your pride doesn't keep a house warm. Sometimes it just feeds the monsters until they grow big enough to swallow you whole.